Welcome friends to today's class. You must have noted that we are now nearing completion of our course on literary theory and criticism. I am sure you have been enjoying and learning a lot from this course. You must have also realized that the history of literary theory is a history of changing notions of readings and interpretations and impacts our understanding of literature. Literary theory is used by students and teachers and scholars alike to cover a range of assumptions that govern theoretical reflection on the nature and function of literary works. This is what we do in literary theory and literary works, that is, it is a theoretical reflection on literature. This is the purpose of theory and criticism. Criticism is more about judgment, okay, making some parameters about judging a work of art, whereas theory is applying certain key theoretical assumptions and ideas to a literary work, literary texts. Theories, as you know, differ from age to age, and we have been through an entire gamut of theories. The differences in method and approaches of a study are often colored by ideological differences. As you know, Marxist and gender theory is steeped in the politics of our times, whereas let us assume semiotics or formalism or structuralism, they are by and large apolitical. So, even deconstruction is apolitical, at least not as politically motivated as Marxist theories. What is significant is that each theory has its complex history of relations with more general theories of society, politics, arts, language, psychology, etc. Theory lacks the kind of stability that science achieves, but this is not to be seen as a shortcoming or weakness, rather it can be also the strength of theory. Now, ideas from one period are often revived for a new generation of thinkers. That is also true. Theory is the product of ideology, and it is important to remember that theorists speak from specific ideological position. Again, literary theory is engaged with several general theories too, such as of theories of knowledge, theories of body, theories of power, theories of politics, cognition, language, and so on. We have seen how literary theory has its roots in classical Greece, in Plato's idea of mimesis, I am sure you remember that, and in Aristotle's Poetics, in Longinus's idea of the sublime, all of which established classical definitions of tragedy and distinguished poetry from history, and where language is recognized as a tool of elevating the mind of the listener. We have also seen important treatises on literary criticism, for instance, Sir Philip Sidney's Defense of Poesy and later John Dryden's essay on dramatic poesy. Now, we also know Immanuel Kant's Critique of Judgment, which marked a shift from the English empirical tradition and established the importance of cognition in aesthetic judgments. For Kant, aesthetic judgments are rooted in a priori principle of taste. The aesthetic judgment of the beautiful is disinterested, universal, and necessary. We know that Kantian system exerted a strong influence on English Romanticism, which inaugurated a tradition of critical reflection on literature and culture that has influenced literary theory. You may also recall the influence of German aesthetic theory on Samuel Taylor Coleridge's work and his Biographia Literaria, and Coleridge, who introduced us to the concept of fancy and imagination, and these ideas are essentially rooted in the aesthetics of Immanuel Kant, Schiller and Schelling, the German philosophers. Again, in coming to another great romantic poet and critic, William Wordsworth, who in his preface to Lyrical Ballads expounds on the nature and function of literary art and rejects neoclassical theories of poetic practice. We also know how realism, which was dominant in the 1850s and 1860s and was an artistic creed which held that the purpose of art was to depict life with complete and objective honesty and to show things as they really are. This was followed by Matthew Arnold, who discusses the threat to culture in Culture and Anarchy. He offers a humanistic education designed to appeal to the upcoming working class and suggests the notion of disinterestedness. We have also learnt about the aesthetic theory of the late 19th century. The influence of ideas is stressed in aestheticism, particularly the concept of autonomy of a work of art, and the insistence on intrinsic values had influence on the writings of the 20th century writers such as W.B. Yeats, T.S. Eliot, as well as in the literary theory of the new critics. This was followed by modernists, and one of the seminal works here is Tradition and Individual Talent by T.S. Eliot, where Eliot states that he believed that the past informed the present and that individual writers of talent became a part of and transformed that tradition if they could create the new work of art. Two other terms related to Eliot's theory are dissociation of sensibility and objective correlative. Formalism is another key area of theory which was based on the works of Saussure, and in the works of Saussure we also became familiar with the way language functioned as a system. Formalists seek to be objective in their analysis, focusing on the work itself and eschewing external considerations. They pay particular attention to literary devices used in the work and to the patterns these devices establish. Formalism developed largely in reaction to the practice of interpreting literary texts by relating them to extrinsic issues such as the historical circumstances and politics of the era in which the work was written. Its philosophical and theological milieu or the experiences and frame of the mind of the author. New criticism. Now, new criticism was a literary movement that started in the late 1920s and 30s and originated in reaction to traditional criticism that new critics saw as largely concerned with matters extraneous to the text. For example, with the biography or psychology of the author or the work's relationship to literary history. New criticism proposed that a work of literary art should be regarded as autonomous and so should not be judged by reference to considerations beyond itself. Coming to post-structuralism, post-structuralism is an extension and critique of structuralism, especially as used in critical textual analysis, which rejects structuralist claims to objectivity and comprehensiveness, typically emphasizing instead the plurality and instability of meaning and frequently using the techniques of deconstruction to reveal unquestioned assumptions and inconsistencies in literary and philosophical discourses. We have also seen this deconstruction, the roots of which can be found in Saussure's semiotic theory of language. Deconstructionists hold the view that truth itself is always relative to the differing standpoints, thus denying the final definitions or truths. The term was introduced by the French philosopher Jacques Derrida and points to the fact that the relationship of language to reality is not given or even reliable, since all language systems are inherently unreliable cultural constructs. Derrida also talks about the false logocentric dependence on language as the mirror of nature. He interrogates the Western tradition, which in his belief had falsely supposed that the relationship between language and world was well founded and reliable. For Derrida, difference is the groundlessness of language, the sphere of linguistic indeterminacy. Out of this indeterminacy and the instability of language is defiance of meaning as spurious closure and its sense of aporia, which is an impasse of incompatible meanings. Deconstruction discloses the literary text as a dissemination of contradictions. We have also become familiar with reader response criticism, which believes that a text has no meaning before a reader experiences it or reads it. Here, the critic examines the ways in which different readers or interpretative communities make meaning out of both personal reactions and inherited ways of reading. Reader response criticism encompasses various approaches to literature that explore and seek to explain the diversity and often divergence of readers' responses to literary works. So, this is the backdrop of what we have been doing so far. We have also done Marxism, semiotics, gender theory. We have also done eco-criticism, film studies, which are newer trends in theory, and also a number of other theories such as post-colonialism. So, we have been discussing theory at length in our course, and now we come to a point which is called post-theory. So, the reason why I introduced today's class is that with all these theories, what is the condition today? Are we living in a period which some scholars term as the post-theory time? Is there anything called post-theory? Well, let us see. So, we know that literary theory can be said to come into being when the approach to literary text is no longer based on non-linguistic or historical and aesthetic, and when the object of discussion is no longer the meaning or the value, but the modalities of production and of reception of meaning and of value prior to their establishment. Now, the significance of literary theory has changed dramatically after 9/11. We have Brian Boyd, who gives us theory as distinct from theory, one theory with a capital T and one with a small t. So, capital T theory represents the high theory of the 1960s through the 1980s in the US, which is the age of post-structuralism and postmodernism. Post-theory or after theory names the post-Derridian condition when we can all breathe a sigh of relief and get back to just reading literature. This is the period where all the theories seem almost like passé, they have been done, and hence the lower case. The complaint against theory are many. For example, people feel, and rightly so, it is excessive, redundant, canonical, rigid, overtly written, reductive of literature. It reduces literature just to a string of theories and high flowing sentences, fragmented. Much criticism of theory pedagogy is also justifiable. We have introductory courses, especially at the undergraduate level, that tend to present theory in a canonical fashion as an end in itself. All these are extremely confusing and often bewildering to people who would just like to read literature for the sake of it. Now, most present a set of lists of isms. Most theories are all about isms accompanied by literary texts which are just there in order to illustrate the approach. The intention to cover the wide range of available approaches encourages us to focus on the theory itself rather than on its purpose, its dialectical relationship with literature. When focus on its purpose is lost, theory can easily seem to be dismissive or reductive of literature and the pleasure of the text. This kind of theory pedagogy fosters theory applique, which is an application of a theory to a text as object which is not creative and does not advance thinking about either literature or theory, focused as it is on the exercise. While a certain amount of theoretical application may be appropriate and even necessary in an undergraduate introductory course, it need not and should not be the sole focus. That is what people who challenge theory believe in. Now, there is another scholar, David H. Richter, who works from Thomas Kuhn's description in the structure of scientific revolutions. Now, David Richter characterizes the state of theory, the period of high theory, as arising from a loss of consensus about the fundamentals of reading literature, about our answers to the questions of why, what and how we read. In this state of theory, we must define every term, defend every statement and address all these questions before we can articulate individual interpretations. Prior to this, there was pragmatic consensus that literature was a supreme and universal expression of human being, that the best and most universal had withstood the test of time to create the canon. There was agreement about the nature of literary language. It was more complicated than the meaning of everyday language. It was more ambiguous or bore layers of meaning. Further, there was agreement about literary meaning as public and objectively available to any competent reader. The best literary works are held as supreme and universal expressions of the human spirit and thus fundamental to education in the humanities. According to Richter, a growing awareness of multiple perspectives and increasing diversity among faculty and students during the 1960s precipitated breakdowns in the paradigm, ranging from questions about the purpose of general education to specifics of literary interpretation. Richter believed that without consensus on what literature is and why we should read it, how we should read it, its critical method was up for grabs. Now, we have another theorist, John Searle, who reminds us of history of theory, its historical situatedness in Europe after the Second World War, and its origins in the understanding that the uncritical trust in what was already accepted as truth does the work of evil or devil for it. We also talk about Gramsci, Lacan, Althusser, Paul de Man, Derrida and Foucault, and Searle says these were writers whose professional careers were shaped by the exigencies of the immediate post-war period. Today, detached from these circumstances, theory has devolved into a series of idiosyncratic projects without opening up any particular pathway to constructive action, functioning instead as merely approaches in the most, and he uses the word in a derogatory term, dependent upon the recycling of the same idea. So, theorizing has become a commodity, a marketable commodity. Okay. It's not, we no longer talk in terms of Gramsci or Lacan because they were the products of their age. Now, all theorists or theories have been reduced to just recycle the old ideas. In other words, the demoralizing, dogmatic and apparently empty practice of literary theory arises from a failure to engage the circumstances of our times and the reality of our lives. Theory no longer asks what theory is, for it is no longer a self-reflective practice. Theory applique approach, that is to teach theory not as an end in itself, but a way of generating meaning from literature as a means towards meaning. So, this is what is needed. We will continue with this in our next class, and that would be our last class, that is post theory. Thank you very much.